watching News 10 ABC.
Welcome back. We're going to take a much closer look now at the response to the PFOA contamination in our area. News 10 ABC's Lindsay Nielsen has been really dedicated to this water problem.
And tonight she shares the tale of two states, Vermont and New York. And Lindsay, you found some pretty jarring differences in their responses, right?
Lydia, I certainly did. Vermont took action just days after officials heard there could be a possible PFOA contamination problem. But here in New York State, emails show village, county, and state officials knew about the problem more than a year before people were told by the EPA not to drink the water. I asked Vermont officials how they handled things. You'll see those interviews here. I tried to do the same with New York State, but they declined an on-camera interview, instead asking me, as they've done for months, to email my questions.
And all of a sudden you wake up one day and people are telling you, hey, you know, the water that you've been drinking, the water that your kids were raised on, the water that you've been consuming, bathing in, it could well be giving you long-term health challenges.
9 days after the state of Vermont was made aware of possible PFOA contamination, the health department set a drinking water advisory level for the toxic chemical. But it took nearly 2 years after Michael Hickey notified officials when he discovered PFOA in the Hoosick Falls water supply for New York to act. But back in March, Governor Cuomo made it clear the state would not set its own level for the hazardous chemical. But other states haven't waited for that.
It is not our place. We don't have the capacity. We're going to look to the federal government to say to us, this is the level of PFOA. But
the EPA says differently. In a statement provided to me, a spokesperson said, quote, New York State has the primary role in implementing its drinking water program. It has experience in dealing with drinking water contaminants and understands the nature of health advisories. So why didn't Vermont wait for the EPA?
Government has a responsibility to react quickly when they figure out that there's a problem.
Each state is really responsible for determining their own levels when the EPA hasn't already determined a level.
Even before any water tests taken near the former ChemFab site in North Bennington were back, Vermont State toxicologist Sarah Vos was pouring through hundreds of pages of EPA documents, trying to come up with the long-term advisory level for PFOA.
It was done several weeks before we actually got results.
I wanted to find out how she researched the dangerous chemical that remains unregulated to this day. Vos told me it wasn't rocket science.
Toxicity times exposure will give us our drinking water level.
In fact, it's something she's done many times before with other unregulated chemicals.
We have health advisory levels for over 100 chemicals.
The PFOA advisory level chosen for Vermont, 20 parts per trillion.
Our value of 20 parts per trillion is based on how much water a small child drinks. That amount of water per body weight is much greater than the amount of water per body weight that an adult drinks.
Vermont's level of 20 parts per trillion, a number drastically lower than what officials in New York have used as guidance. They've used 400 parts per trillion, which was later lowered to 100 parts per trillion in Region 2, the Hoosick Falls area. Governor Cuomo said back in March he wants a common standard nationwide.
So it's not just as simple as, well, pick the lowest number that you can, right? Because that's not responsible either.
Vermont confidently defends its decision to go lower.
The risk assessor who was on this, and along with our toxicologist, they're very passionate about this work, so it's not just work. They believe it deep in their souls.
You know, our health department looked at this very carefully, and we feel that 20 parts per trillion is the threshold that should really be the standard, not only for Vermont, but for the region, because this stuff is not good.
New York and Vermont are not the only states dealing with the issue. It's been reported that 27 states have areas that have tested positive for levels of the toxic chemical. This map from the Environmental Working Group highlights in red locations in a number of states with PFOA. The EPA conducted testing for certain areas, but stopped in 2015.
There is going to be a fight for clean water ahead because of the environmental abuse that the entire planet is engaging in with irrational exuberance.
I've tried numerous times to speak with the New York State Department of Health on camera to be part of this story, but instead they got back to me late Tuesday in an email. The department said, quote, all states have the right to be to be treated equally when it comes to the health and safety of its residents. No one state deserves to abide by a provisional health advisory level that is lower than that of another state. That's why New York State has been calling on the EPA to set clear guidelines that can be followed nationwide. There are still many follow-up questions. I'm still working to try to speak with anybody there in